Welcome to Designing Healthcare That Cares, the show where we explore how to build healthcare systems where people and performance thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Suttin, a physician, coach, and healthcare leader who believes that human flourishing and organizational excellence go hand in hand. Each week, I talk with leaders, change makers, and innovators about how to shift culture, lead with purpose, and tackle the root causes of burnout. Because when healthcare works for the people in it, everyone wins. Welcome to the Designing Healthcare That Cares podcast. I'm really excited to have our guest today, Sheri Jacobs. I'll read her bio and then get started. So Sheri Jacobs transforms the way organizations innovate, navigate uncertainty, and prepare for the future of work. A 3-time best-selling author, researcher, and CEO of Avenue M Group, she has surveyed nearly 1 million people and worked with over 300 organizations to uncover how leaders can amplify every voice, foster risk-taking, and build greater resilience. In addition to leading Avenue M Group, Sheri has helped shape industry standards through her service on the board of directors for the American Society of Association Executives and the ASAE Foundation. Based in Denver, Colorado, Sheri draws inspiration from her adventures photographing wildlife from Antarctica to Zambia, and from daily life with her husband, John, and their 3 spirited dogs, Zoe, Ellie, and Jonah. Sheri, thanks so much for being here. Great to have you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Laura.
So we're talking a little bit just now before we hit record about some kind of our shared interests. Again, talking about healthcare. I know you've done a ton of work in healthcare. I definitely want to dive into that. But I'm curious a little bit about just your background and how you got into the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, it was an interesting route. So I went to college and became a photojournalist. I worked for newspapers and my passion was sports. And I tell people back in the day, I shot Michael Jordan when he played for the Chicago Bulls with a manual focus camera and film.
Wow.
And it was so much fun. It was an exciting time. But I eventually transitioned out of that into working in nonprofits because I helped start a nonprofit for girls in the inner city by giving them cameras and having them express themselves and share what their lives were like. And through that work, I transitioned out of being a photojournalist for newspapers and started looking for and working in nonprofits, mostly associations. So I put down my cameras and focused on working at 3 associations. And then I got this entrepreneurial spirit. I love to do more and to help organizations grow. So I started my own company, Avenue M Group, about 15 years ago. And over that time, started writing books and doing keynotes. And then about 5 years ago, I really missed photography. And while I'm not going to go shoot the Chicago Bulls, wildlife is a lot like sport. It's fast moving, it's unpredictable, you can't set it up. And I have a passion for the outdoors and for nature. So I started small, just photographing hummingbirds at the local garden. And then I started taking trips to Africa and to the Arctic and Antarctica. And actually, I just got back from Botswana, my 8th trip to Africa.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, so much I want to dive into. I love the connection that you made between wildlife and sports. I would never have thought of that. But yeah, you never quite know what you're going to capture. And your pictures are gorgeous. So we'll definitely want to include your website in our show notes and encourage listeners to check it out. And so it really sounds like you've created this life for yourself where you're doing a lot of what you love. Your photography, which is one of your first loves, and then keynotes and writing and speaking and working with associations and the nonprofit work and spreading your message to millions of people.
Absolutely. And the experiences that I have out in the field as a photographer or as a researcher or even giving keynotes with all that I have on my plate, it all ties back. These are the experiences that has actually helped me create this concept around how do you get done what you want to accomplish in a realistic way and not feel overwhelmed or burnt out. Because so many of us do have so many goals and so many things that we want to do, but it can be overwhelming. And so people often say, Sheri, how do you fit it in? Do you have more hours in the day than the rest of us? And the answer is no. I actually have created very strict boundaries around what I say yes to and what I say no to. And that enables me to achieve more, to pursue these things.
Yeah, I love that. And I definitely want to dive in because specifically around boundaries, and one of your books is titled The Unexpected Power of Boundaries. And that title just resonates so much with me because even the word boundary can feel constricting, I think. And I was just on a group coaching call last night with an organization I coach with. And it was a lot of women physicians talking about struggling setting boundaries. And at least I hear this a lot, this feeling that setting boundaries is going to increase suffering in some way or be more difficult than it needs to be. And there can be some challenges, but I want to hear from your perspective and really where this message came from, how freeing it can be to set boundaries.
Sure, absolutely. So I start by thinking about if we looked at the world around us, it's exciting, right? There are so many possibilities. There's all the new technology, there's all the new tools out there. And you feel this rush of excitement because there's so many new doors that are opening. But at the same time, we feel also uncertain or overwhelmed or even just stuck. And while there's so much that we can do when there are unlimited options out there, we tend to retreat back to what we've always done. I call it we stay on our playground. We don't expand out there because it's almost overwhelming what you should do in any field, in any industry. So people often ask me, how do I get unstuck? Or how do I explore the things that I want to do? And that's when I introduce the idea of having boundaries in there because that actually gives you the freedom to explore all the way up to it. So, Laura, I'll give you a quick example that totally makes sense for people. There was a study, just a little experiment done by a landscape architect who was curious about the impact how physical boundaries have on how children play. So she set up this experiment. She asked a group of preschool teachers to take their kids to a park. And the park had the typical like wood chips and the swings and the slide and the big grassy area, but it was a big wide open space. And when the classes got to the playground, to the park, every single child stayed on the playground. Not one ventured out into the grassy area in the park. So a week later, she takes the same group of kids, same teachers, to a different park in town. And while it's nearly identical, this one has a fence that goes all the way around it. And when they get there to the park, more than half the kids scattered. They ran all the way to the fences. They would play, they would try something. And if that game didn't work out, they would try something else. And what she observed in this experiment was that when we know how far we can go, we feel safer to explore and to experiment and to even try things that may not work. When we don't, we play it safe.
Yeah.
And so that to me, it's such a great analogy for thinking of like, what if I defined where the fences were around my work, around the things that I want to do? And no, I can go all the way up to that fence. I'm not going to go beyond that. It actually is liberating instead of limiting.
Yeah, that's such an interesting experiment. The analogy that came up for me when I was hearing you is one I put about in my book about like going to an amusement park. So it's overstimulating. There's so many choices that you can explore and go for the ride or eat food or go see a show or whatever. But having fewer choices actually can be more calming to the nervous system than having an unlimited number of choices. So it makes sense. And I'm sure you see this all the time too, that in practice, this FOMO or this fear of missing out or really wanting to do what everybody else is doing. I was working with a physician client who was really exploring ways to create additional income streams. And so she started joining online groups talking about, and she said, well, everybody's doing real estate. I could become a medical expert or I could be a coach or all these different things. And she's like, it's just too overwhelming for me. I don't know what to do. And so that's kind of what you're describing is that this sense of unlimited possibilities and unlimited choices, it actually causes more overwhelm than if we created some of these boundaries for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. The great analogy I also give is imagine you're walking into the Cheesecake Factory, right? You sit down, they put that huge menu in front of you. There are 463 items in it. At first, you're really excited. You're like, oh, am I going to get something new? But as you turn those pages of possibility, you end up landing on the thing that you always order when you get there because there's just too many choice.
Yeah.
Versus going to a restaurant that has 5 items on the menu and then you think, you know what? I think I'll try something new. And it's just so much easier. And the world of healthcare today, and with all the tools and the technologies, and then all those other areas where you can earn income, it's kind of like that Cheesecake Factory menu, right? 463 different options out there. So I'm overwhelmed by it. And so being able to select the area, the space that you want to work in can now be more liberating, because the first step is defining the boundaries, but you don't just stop there, because the next step is where you get input from a variety of sources, even unexpected places. And then the third is, once you've defined that, that's when you could start taking more shots. That's when you could start exploring those ideas. But you can't jump to I want to try something new without defining the space that you want to work in.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's almost like defining a media or a medium for an artist. A lot of artists really focus on one or maybe two different media, but if the possibilities are endless, and there's no way to really hone in and really perfect that craft.
Exactly. And it's in all aspects of our life, right? For me, it's wildlife photography, right? People ask me all the time, oh, do you shoot portraits? I'm like, I don't do people. I really love that space that I work in. Yes, you can explore and expand in other areas. So like my husband, he loves to cook and he's always exploring new cuisines. But what he does is he picks an area and then he gets really good at that, right? So it might be Mexican food or Chinese food. He's always exploring it, but he stays within that area and he gets better in that one space. For me, actually, one of my boundaries I wanted to get done was to bake the perfect chocolate chip cookie. Not to become the best pastry chef or the best baker, but the perfect chocolate chip cookie. So I had this focus on it. And I looked up every single recipe and I had set a time frame of 6 months. And I experimented with all these different things. And at the end, I do have actually the best chocolate chip cookie recipe with the secret ingredient, which I'm happy to share with you if you're curious. But it makes the perfect chocolate chip cookie. And if I had scattered and said, I just want to be a great baker, I would probably not perfect anything.
I love that. I mean, I love chocolate chip cookies. So, yes, what is your secret ingredient?
So it's maple syrup.
Oh,
Yeah. I mean, there's a few other things and I have the recipe. So I can give you a link to my website where I do actually have this chocolate chip cookie recipe on the website, because I talk about it in my keynote too.
yeah. Love that. I'm sure our listeners will dive into that for sure. As I'm listening to this, and if I'm somebody who's really have never practiced setting a boundary, I don't know what it looks like or what it feels like. How would I get started?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I recommend in thinking about it and how you can more easily get started with it and kind of get unstuck. So first is really ask yourself, what matters to you right now within it? What are not just the work to be done, but the outcomes that you want to see? What's most important to you in that space? And while that is setting a boundary, it also is opening up a lot of opportunities, because you've just clearly defined, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to focus my energy. The second is to audit the noise. So for a week, they track all the different distractions that may be coming in there. There are many that are unrelated to this, but what are the ones that are pulling you away from achieving that or pursuing that goal in that area? And it could be all the social media platforms. So maybe there's just one, or it could be all the publications or all the resources out there. So just by narrowing that focus in there. And then the third is to understand your capacity for taking risk, which is very different from your tolerance. So risk tolerance is your comfort level, right? We all have low, medium, or high tolerance for taking risks. Some people are play it safers. They feel very low tolerance for risk, and other people are bigger risk takers. But making a change or exploring something new is not about your comfort level with risk or change. It's with your capacity. And what I mean by that is, if you do this and it doesn't succeed, what happens? And evaluating that and having more of our objective look at what happens if I fail. Well, can I come back? Can I experiment? Can I learn again? Instead of looking at risk tolerance, that's looking at your capacity. And those three things will really help people kind of move forward.
Yeah. It's so helpful, really differentiating between the capacity and comfort level with risk. What comes up for me when I hear that is that both of those things might shift over time. in different ways. So I had a client the other day. She's a clinician. Her husband's a clinician also. She has two small kids and she wanted to cut back her working hours so that she could pick up her son from school. So he wouldn't have to go to the after school program, all those kinds of things. Really wanted to be more present with her family. And so she was talking about the impacts of these decisions she would be making on the family. And I was just really thinking that when her kids are small, her capacity and her tolerance might be one level. And then when her kids are older, so we're empty nesters now. My daughter is off at college and she's a freshman this year. And so my priorities are shifting a little bit. And the way that I will live my life and carry out my day is going to be different now than it was a year ago when she was home. And so at least that's what's coming up for me. Is that kind of am I on the right track there with what you're saying about risk?
100%. And I've been through the similar situation. My daughter, when she was very young, I limited the amount of travel that I could do. I wanted to make sure I was there for her cross country meets. Men and women, we're all trying to find that balance. And it's hard. That perfect balance is hard to achieve. But instead of that perfect balance, it's prioritizing and saying, this is what's really important to me. And at this point right now, my capacity for doing things is here. And yes, it may change. But some people make assumptions around their capacity. Oh, I need to be there every day, when they can have actually evaluate it and say, oh, you know what? 1 or 2 days a week, I can do this, or there are some options there. So kind of looking at that, but it definitely changes over time. The one thing I recommend is, as you're shifting, as your schedule shifts and as your priorities and your availability shifts, start small. Right? Start thinking about, okay, I don't have to make a big decision and change everything, but how can I make one small change and test it, experiment with it? Does this work? And then build on that rather than a huge leap.
Yeah. The small shifts and the small wins can really build confidence. And even if they're a little bit scary at first, then it gives us the confidence and the capacity for bigger decisions and bigger risks. I love what you said about auditing the noise too. This is something that as I was coaching this client, I kept noticing what she was saying it out loud. I imagine she'd been telling herself, well, I can't cut back because it's a big financially right now and I'll make less money. And I said, this sounds like a stupid question, but tell me what's bad about making less money. And she kind of looked and she was like, I never thought about it that way. And so I said, I'm just hearing this belief that you have that, first of all, this belief in itself that you'll make less money if you work less hours. Let's question that. And then this belief that, what were you telling yourself about what it means to make less money? And so it's interesting just how much our brains are telling us, running these stories in our head that we don't often realize. That's one of the things that I love about coaching. Any sort of support like that, somebody who's objective, who can, hey, I hear you saying this. Let's dig in. And is this really true? Is this something that we've picked up over the years and are having a hard time letting go of?
Yeah, that's exactly the risk capacity. So I've worked with a lot of organizations, not as many individuals like you do, Laura, but when I've worked with organizations and they're thinking about changing their business model, there's a significant risk associated with it. And what happens is you get the decision maker, especially the leaders in the room, who are thinking, if this fails, how does that look on me and my reputation here? And so they often will make a decision that's based on their tolerance for it, or some assumptions, just like that mom had about cutting back on her hours, and assumptions about what the impact it'll have. And so I try to walk them through, well, let's look at your capacity for making some changes and what you might learn, as well as if you don't make these moves, what potentially could happen. So let's break it down and really think about the revenue and how money is spent and all of these other questions before you make a decision based on an assumption. And that really is where you look at the capacity, not just your tolerance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so helpful. So helpful. And I think that's a great segue because I want to talk from a leadership perspective, this top down approach versus a bottom up approach of making decisions and gathering information and making sure that everybody has a voice within the organization. And so let's just dive in there. Tell us what's been your experience with that message and how did you come to that? Was it through your work as a personally in your nonprofit work, or was it through your surveys? Tell us how you came across that.
Sure. So it came through a variety of different ways. First, we all experience every day, have a customer experience, right? We go into our local coffee shop and we have an interaction with the barista. We go to a store, we purchase something, and that one-on-one experience that we have forms our opinions, shapes our perceptions of things. But the individual that we're interacting with that is closest to the customer is frequently the last person that companies and organizations connect with or listen to get feedback about change. Decisions are often made from the C-suite, right? The executives there who are oftentimes 3 levels away or more. So we know that, right? We have that experience every day. And then when I combined that just acknowledgement and that experience that I've had with a story that I learned about a brand that has been around for 70 years and that we have a number of these green pebble thermoses in our house because my husband is a woodworker and it's the old Stanley thermos. And that Stanley company had been around for 70 years. They were making maybe about 70 million when Terrence Riley came in as the new CEO. And when he came in, Lauren Solomon, who was a young sales associate there, came up to him because he wanted to listen to everybody in the organization and see what's working, what's not working, and where ideas coming from. And Terrence knew that it wasn't going to come from the C-suite. He knew these ideas are likely to come from people who are more connected to the customer. Well, Lauren had heard about this small blog in Utah and these women who were running it. And they kept asking Lauren, can you get us more of these Stanley quenchers? And they were about to not have the line anymore, discontinue the line. But Terrence said, what's a small experiment we could run? And so what he did was he worked out a deal that they sent 5,000 of the Stanley quenchers to that blog and they sold out immediately, like within an hour. And then he sent 50,000 and then he sent 5 million and it was like game over. And now the company just 5 years later is 750 million. So they grew tenfold from this, but Terrence credits it from listening to somebody who is much closer to the customer, making sure that inputs come in, not just from the team that you surround yourself with, but from other people that may have insights that no one's listening to. And that wasn't even his first try. Like before that, he had worked for Crocs and he had the same turnaround there similarly, but that time with an intern. I love that story. And when I combine that with my own interaction that I have on a daily basis with people that are right there in front of you and thinking about, you don't even give them the feedback when you have a positive or a negative experience because you're like, it's never going to go anywhere. That person probably has no connection, no through line to decision makers. And that's when I started thinking about how important it is for organizations, leaders, individuals to make sure that they gather those inputs, not just from the circle that's around them, but from other people that are closest to the person that you're impacting.
I love that story. I didn't realize that's what made the Stanley Cups so popular.
Now, Laura, do you have some in your house?
I don't think so. I've had so many water bottles over the year that I never had a desire to get one, but I mean, they're all over and SNL did a skit on them. So, they were blowing up.
Right. Usually when
Yeah.
I'm giving a keynote and I share that story and I ask people who here has one, almost everyone raised their hand.
Yeah.
You say, well, who has 2? Who has 3? I'm like 5, 10. And somebody in the audience will be like, I have so many, I don't even know how many.
That's awesome. I never knew that story, but it makes sense. It's the associate who was listening to the customer and listening to what the customer wants. And yeah, I love that story. That's very cool.
And Terrence knew he's not going to bet everything on it. He doesn't know, but he can run a small experiment.
Yeah.
You could just do the experiment and learn. And if it didn't work, there's very little lost from that.
Yeah.
But the previous CEO hadn't been listening, and it was really hard before Terrence came in for this idea to go through.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. That's so cool. In my previous role in a large healthcare organization, one of the things that I got to do for a while that I loved was going into our different clinics and just sitting with them and listening to them. What are the challenges that you have? What are the ideas that you have to really help with these operational processes and things that we can do better and do different? And some of them were really struggling with things that were pretty solvable, but they had raised a challenge that maybe just didn't go anywhere. Their disabled accessible parking spot was 2 spots over from their ramp. So somebody gets out of the disabled accessible parking spot, they have to either walk over to the ramp or they hop up on their walker, their wheelchair, and from where they are. And somebody actually did that. They hopped up on their walker, they fell in the parking lot, and that patient ended up passing away. And this one clinic was so distressed by this. They said, if we can just move the ramp next to the accessible parking spot, it would solve so many problems. And they had met with some of the decision makers to try to get this done, but they hadn't expressed the impact and how powerful this story was and how just really made like the human connection there. And so we were able to kind of coordinate efforts and get that ramp moved. And that's one of the most moving a ramp is like one of the most gratifying things I did in my time there. But yeah, again, when we were able to listen to the people that are closest to the action, they have the best ideas.
They do. Laura, have you ever heard of the Good Catch program that came out of CHOP?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I talk about it in my book because it's similar to what you're saying. I'm sure there were individuals, and they're always in healthcare, individuals that catch a mistake. They catch something before it becomes something bigger. And somebody may have seen somebody stumble on that ramp, but they didn't have a program or a process for people to say, oh, you know what? I saw this. Let's catch this before it becomes something bigger. But I'm certain other people observed that the challenge of that ramp before that incident occurred. And so I love that the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia had that Good Catch program. And I talk about how that's a great way to make every voice heard, to make sure that people know that when mistakes are made, you can be rewarded or it's something that's beneficial. So years ago, I worked at a startup that actually made it. And this is a long time ago. This is the year 2000. The NASDAQ had crashed and we were starting up a company doing something electronic transactions that nobody was doing on the internet at the time. Because way back then, it was like sports scores, emails, and chat rooms.
Yeah.
And we were starting a company, but we knew that this was a huge opportunity to get in early. And we were successful. We became the largest online payroll company in the world. It was called Sure Payroll, and it got acquired by Paychex eventually. But when we got out of that startup phase and we wanted to keep that innovation type of mindset, we wanted to encourage people to experiment and that it's okay if you failed and you tried something. So we created the Best New Mistake Award, which is similar to the program they had there, the Good Catch. So the Best New Mistake, there was a monetary awards for staff, the best customer service or a new technology is implemented. But the Best New Mistake Award was 4 times the monetary value of all other awards. And you could self-nominate. And if you experimented, tried something, it failed, but you learned something from it, you would submit that for this award. And that helped Sure Payroll continue to be the innovative company that we had started 25 years ago.
That's so cool because I'm sure you see this all the time. Companies really struggling with innovation and, how do we encourage this? How do we encourage innovation in our employees and them to take risks and fail fast and fail forward? But if failure is not recognized and celebrated, then naturally people aren't going to do it. And then if it's not modeled at the top, right? If our leaders are afraid to admit when they've made a mistake or done something that failed, then it's not going to trickle down either. I love that approach. That's so cool.
Thanks, Laura. And one of the things I talk about in my framework is that when you listen to Amy Edmondson or other people who talk about psychological safety, they talk about how you have to create a culture where people can experiment and failure is understood as part of the growth process, right? But there's something that's left out of that conversation. And to me, what's left out is the boundaries. So when you have high psychological safety, but very clear boundaries around how far people can play, that 4th quadrant, when you have both of those, that's when you're in the innovation zone. Because if you have high psychological safety, but people don't know how far they can go and experiment, they may wander in and then go back to what they always do. And if you have very high, clear boundaries, but you don't allow people to experiment, then that's just compliant. But when you have high psychological safety and very clear boundaries, this is how far you can go and experiment with what you're doing and allowed to make mistakes, and people know it and understand it and it's clear, that's where the innovation zone happens.
Yeah, that makes so much sense that you really need both. You have to have the safety and the boundaries in order for innovation to take hold.
Exactly.
That's so cool. Well, it's so wonderful to talk to you, Sheri. Thank you so much for being here. So you've got a new book coming out, so tell us all about that.
Yeah, thank you. So, my new book is called The Unexpected Power of Boundaries: Rethinking the Rules, Risks, and Real Drivers of Innovation. And I'm so excited. It's going to come out in early part of 2026, and it's going to be on Amazon and all the bookstores and also on Audible.
Great. We'll be sure to include that in the show notes as well. And where can our listeners find you?
So they can find me at SheriJacobs.com. And I have somewhat of an unusual spelling to my name. So I know you'll put that in the show notes too, but it's SHERI Jacobs.com. So they could find me there. And I have some additional resources plus the photos from some of my adventures around the world.
Yeah, definitely want folks to check that out. Thank you so much for being here. So wonderful to talk to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. It's been my pleasure.
Before you go, let me share a quick story about when I was new as a physician leader. I remember very clearly walking into a boardroom with a meeting with fellow executives, and I felt like a massive imposter. I told myself, I'm not smart enough to be here. I don't know enough about this topic. I'm not able to contribute in the way that I wish I could. I was a physician. I had an MBA. I had other leadership skills. And here I was just doubting myself incredibly. And it held me back. It really kept me from contributing to my team and to the overall organization. It took me years to develop the confidence that I needed in order to be successful in that role. And I eventually learned that my imposter syndrome wasn't about my lack of competence or my lack of skill or knowledge. I hadn't had the training that I needed in order to be successful. I've seen this over and over in my years of coaching clinician leaders that we're asked to be in leadership positions, but we haven't been given the tools and the trainings. Maybe we've gotten some leadership training, but it's rather generic and it's not meant for us. That's why I created the Clinician Leadership Compass course. This course is designed specifically for physicians, nurse practitioners, and physician associates who are in leadership positions and who are struggling with overwhelm, burnout, imposter syndrome, isolation. I created this course just for you. This course includes real coaching sessions with real clinician leaders, and you'll be able to take away practical tools that you can use immediately to reduce your overwhelm and burnout. And CME is included as well. The course is now open, and when you complete it, you'll earn up to 10 AMA PRA Category 1 CME credits and the Certified Clinician Leader designation. I would love for you to be there. Go to www.thepurposefulmd.com/courses to enroll today, and I can't wait to see you inside. Thanks for listening to Designing Healthcare That Cares. If today's conversation gave you a new idea or inspired you to see things differently, share this episode with a colleague and keep the conversation going. And if you're ready to take the next step in building a thriving healthcare culture, you can find resources and ways to connect with me at drlaurasuttin.com. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, and it should not replace care from a qualified healthcare provider. Always seek the guidance of your physician or other qualified professional for any medical questions or decisions.